I'll be right with you, Stream. As soon as this music stops. Well, it looks like it looks like we're on here, Harley. I was told that there was some dead air going on in the background, but the recorder shows something is being recorded. So, Harley, you there? No, wait a second. All right, let's try that again. Harley, you there?
Yes, I'm here, Jack.
All right. Good, good, good. Welcome, everybody, to the Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell. I will be here for an hour this morning. Also on the stream, Harley Schlanger, calling in from Germany, is with us this morning. And Harley, let me just start off by saying that if a year ago you had prophesied to me what has been going on for the last month, I probably would have believed you. But had you prophesied to me a year ago what has been going on this last week, I would have a very hard time believing you. Relative to relative to what is going on. All right, Harley, you got to hold on a second here. Because yes. All right, let's get back. Harley, Paul was trying to come through. I'm not sure why, but there's definitely something playing in the background at K Talk, according to my recorder here. With that kind of an introduction, um, is it time for the 25th Amendment? Especially this outburst, this incredibly childish, immature schoolboy outburst that came out this last weekend, directed from the Oval Office toward the nation of Iran.
Well, let me give you the latest that just came out. President Trump just released on Truth Social that he's having positive discussions. Our envoys are having positive discussions with the Iranians. So he's not going to launch anything tomorrow, which he had said he would. And it appears as though we're making good progress toward a permanent settlement. He said Iran has responded appropriately, and they say they're talking with a top official of the administration, the Iranian official. Now, this is a report from Barak Ravid in Axios. Ravid is a former operative for the 8200 Israeli intelligence operation, which is not exactly reliable. But he claims that Witkoff and Kushner had been in touch with the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Ghalibaf, and they're going to have a meeting probably in Islamabad, Pakistan. Now, this has been supposedly in the works for a while. And the Pakistani officials said they're willing to do it, but so far there's been no confirmation from Iran or from Witkoff or Kushner. Now, Ghalibaf, who's the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, said that there's been no such discussion. The Iranians will stand firmly behind their unwillingness to negotiate away their sovereignty. But Trump did say on Truth Social that he's putting off, once again, the maximum attack on Iran that he promised. Now, it's so hard to what to expect, because with Trump, we've come to recognize that what he says is not necessarily what he will do, and it's not clear if there's support for what he's doing from his own administration. Remember, Hegseth fired a couple of top generals this last few days. So I think it's somewhat foolish to make predictions other than to say that the misestimation made by the planners in the Trump administration, such as they are, has cost the United States an incredible amount of credibility in the world and has led to nothing but a continued using up of ammunition, senseless killing, and a creation of an additional tension that's not going to go away very easily.
Well, some of these threats that he's made over the last month, and then he'll put an extension, and then he will stop it because they're having talks. And of course, any sensible, reasonable, trustworthy spokesman on behalf of Iran says, no, there's no talks going on. Where is this leading? Here we have, especially over this last weekend, we've lost two C-130s. We've lost an A-10 Warthog. We've lost a couple of the little birds. They have in captivity the defense weapons coordinator for an F-15 Eagle. But on the American side, everybody got rescued. They blew up a 130 because it was damaged because it was too deep in the sand, and they didn't want the IRGC getting control of the software. And then you've got the Iranian side of this argument, and it's some of the people that I used to talk to, K-Talk listeners and personal friends, who were pretty well staying glued to most of what was going on, don't want to listen to anything anymore because they don't know who to trust anymore. And they have just kind of gone back into Plato's cave. Don't tell me anything that threatens the status quo as I understand it in my own mind. At the same time, you see this administration's numbers dropping down to the level of Starmer and Macron. Where's this leading? Is there a possibility of the 25th Amendment?
Well, I think we'll find out a lot more as this next week unfolds, because sooner or later we're going to find out whether there are talks going on or not. The Iranians have said if they're hit in their power plants and their desalination plants and so on, that they will take out more U.S. assets in the region. And among the things they hit, I don't know if you got this, but over the last week, they hit the Oracle metadata collection plant in the UAE. Now, Oracle is owned by Larry Ellison. He's one of the richest men in the world. He's a big supporter of Trump. He was a close collaborator with Jeffrey Epstein and also with Netanyahu. And he put this metadata center in the UAE with the promise it would have maximum electricity and it would be used to coordinate defense policy, satellites, and so on in the case of a war. Now, if that was taken out, that is something pretty big. And they also say an Amazon center was hit. So I think what we do know for certain is that the Iranians have not been defeated. They're continuing to fight. The U.S. and Israel are destroying whole sections now of the civilian sector. which are actually war crimes. And we'll find out over the period immediately ahead whether what Trump is saying about negotiations is true or not. But as I pointed out, I think that he's going to have a problem with the U.S. military. Now, the military generally is upstanding. They'll do what they're told, and they'll do it fairly well. But I think what we're seeing is there are generals who are saying this war plan is no good. It's not going to succeed in what we're intending. It's not necessary. And it's a great cost in terms of equipment, logistics, money, and hopefully at some point not, but maybe manpower. And if that happens, if he does try to go in with boots on the ground, I think then we might see some motion toward the 25th Amendment.
Well, apparently, some of the sources that I've been reading, the generals like General George and some of the others that were removed, were vocally putting their foot down against boots on the ground. And so what Hegseth was doing was to get rid of this opposition before they actually did it, to try to head off not necessarily a military coup, but a military standoff with their own people who refused to carry out those kinds of orders. Because now, with the threat of Trump and their attacks on the nuclear facility that have already happened, to the point where the Russians are pulling their people out of the area that had an awful lot to do with that nuclear power plant because of the danger of imminent radiation leak. And then the threats of taking out desalination plants, the threats of taking out bridges. These are war crimes that were defined not just in the Geneva Convention, but in treaties that have been signed since then. These are war crimes. And when you go back to the trial of the German officers at Nuremberg, they weren't, the officers that were hung for creating a war of aggression. They weren't hung so much for war crimes as we kind of imagine with the so-called Holocaust and things like that. They were hung for starting a war of aggression, which is exactly what the United States and Israel did on February 28th, the night of. And so it's getting to the point now where I know among friends that I've talked to about this, K-Talk listeners who happen to be patients in the clinic, it is more divisive in family groups, church groups, social groups, working groups in offices. It's causing severe emotional barriers between people who were once friends. Those who think that MAGA can be saved, those who were former MAGA supporters to the point where they would donate blood, who are having serious doubts about it any longer, and the continuing clown show that's put on by Hegseth and the Oval Office. The only thing I can think of is that not necessarily the Iranian side, but the Israeli side is trying to push and push and push for continued demolition of Tel Aviv, Haifa, Eastern Jerusalem, and other places, to where Israel's going to be cornered and finally have to use nukes. Not one, but several. Now that's the game plan as I see it. Straighten me out.
Well, I think that's pretty much right. I mean, let's just take two questions that might shift the whole situation. One is the polls are showing a catastrophic drop of support for President Trump. And I think polls are polls. They depend on how the questions are asked and what the sample audience is and so on. But there's enough evidence to show that he's losing significant ground well before the 2026 midterm elections. And this has definitely caught the attention of the White House. Now, the second thing is we're not hearing a whole lot from Russia and China. And there's some interesting hypotheses about what's going on there. And there have been calls in the last days from some of the developing sector countries, the global south countries, for China to step in, or Putin step in, and talk Trump out of his current course of action. Now, Putin has been continuing to keep the lines open with Witkoff and Kushner, talking with Dmitriev, who's the Russian negotiator, to try and do something to end the war in Ukraine. And it's clear that either Kushner and Witkoff are completely incompetent, or they don't want to end the war. And so the Russians are looking at this situation. They're looking at the attacks going on against Iran. They're looking at the Trump administration saying, we want to negotiate, and then killing the negotiators, and the Israelis doing that. And they're asking the question of, why are we holding back? And now Medvedev, the former president and a very significant spokesman for Russian policy, said that the current attacks going on against Russia from Ukraine, in which Ukraine is getting drones from Israel in some cases, and the Ukrainians are targeting extensively inside Russia. So what do the Russians do in this circumstance? Now, imagine this. What would happen in this country if Putin said, we're not going to negotiate, we're going to negotiate with bombs, and we're going to spend more money because it takes a lot of money to kill the bad guys? What if Putin said those kinds of things? You know, the population would be up in arms. But that's what Trump has been saying. That's what Hegseth actually has said. And so there are two factors here. One, what's going to happen with the American people? Will the American people tolerate this going on in our name? The increased spending, the announcement of $500 billion more dollars going into the defense of Israel at the expense of American infrastructure and jobs. Will the Americans tolerate this kind of degradation and discrediting of the United States as a legitimate, honest broker? Well, that's on the American people. And what we're doing, what the LaRouche movement is doing, is basically saying it's time for the people to step up and make it clear they're not going to put up with this anymore. And then the question is, what will the Russians and the Chinese do? Now, Trump is supposed to be meeting with Xi Jinping soon. What's clear is that the one thing that's helping some of the countries that otherwise would be devastated by the increased prices and unavailability of LNG and oil, they're being helped by China. And China's credibility and image in the world has gone up as ours has collapsed. Now, is someone going to tell that to Trump? And these are some of the factors that are vulnerabilities for the United States. And by the way, if the only option is Israel using their nuclear weapons, I can't tell this for sure, but I would be pretty sure that Netanyahu would not hold back. The question is, would Trump tell him, you can't do it? And so these are all intangibles. We don't know, but it's incredibly dangerous. But instead of waiting to see, the American people should mobilize now. And one of the things we've been doing is we've been taking a letter from Helga LaRouche to Pope Leo XIV, because Leo has been very straightforward in saying that God does not want to kill. God does not want to bomb other countries. And using this as a polemic against this idea of Hegseth and some of his messianic crazies in the military and intelligence establishment, who are saying that what the U.S. is doing to Iran is going to bring the return of Jesus Christ in the Battle of Armageddon.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to see a reaction from real Christians against this kind of nonsense. And so maybe we'll see the American people step up, the Russians, the Chinese, and hopefully Trump will come to his senses.
Well, there are Jewish groups in Israel trying to speak out against this. There's Jewish groups in New York City speaking out against this, trying to make sure that the world understands that what the IDF and what Netanyahu is doing doesn't represent all of the Jewish people by any means. And that's one of the things that I have appreciated about a certain level of censorship with the IDF. You can't send out pictures of the constant bombing of Tel Aviv, but at the same time, the Jerusalem Times, which of course is Netanyahu's spokesperson or spokespress, but what you get from Haaretz, that they continue to be able to print what they're printing, a certain absence of censorship that obviously we have here that is continuing to go on there, where more and more of the Israeli citizens are saying they don't support this one bit, as are many Americans saying the same thing, especially former hardcore dyed-in-the-wool MAGA members. So it's, like you said, this week will tell us a lot. I thought last week would tell us a lot. And so here...
It did.
Well, yes.
What it told us is that, I hate to say this because I'm not a big fan of Chuck Schumer by any means. And I worked really hard to help Diane Sare when she ran against him for Senate in New York. But Schumer said something yesterday which the Democrats have been afraid to say, which is he said, Trump is shrieking like a deranged person.
Yes.
Now, imagine if the Democrats, instead of just being a loyal opposition, and by the way, most of them support the what's going on with the U.S. military.
Yes, I do.
If the Democrats presented a legitimate opposition and linked up with the Republicans who are, I'm told that there are at least 20 to 30 Republicans who are now caucusing and discussing having to do something to change what Trump is doing. And this is, when you talk about the 25th Amendment, you need to get support, in a sense, from both parties. Otherwise, it's just seen as a ganging up partisan issue. But if you have congressmen now talking about this, there's a chance that either they'll reach out and get the Trump administration to straighten up, or else they'll create enough pressure that something would happen. Now, one of the things that was very instrumental in shaping the Republican opposition, getting them out a little bit into the open, was the Joe Kent resignation. And Kent was about as loyal a MAGA guy as you could find. But what he said to Tucker Carlson and others was very heartfelt, that he could not in good conscience support what Trump is doing. Now there's a big question. Kent was the number 2 person in the Director of National Intelligence Office. He was the head of the National Counterterrorism Center, and he served under Tulsi Gabbard. What is Tulsi Gabbard going to do? Now, there's something interesting that she did do this last week, which is that she took over a company called In-Q-Tel, which was set up by the CIA as a venture capitalist firm to raise funds for the surveillance state and for weapons and so on. Now, maybe there's something moving on that front, but it's getting a little late. And I think if Kent is listened to, what he's saying is that we're in a situation where a nuclear accident could happen by a false flag, or by just Netanyahu saying, the hell with it, we've got to finish off Iran. And so it's an urgent moment. And, Jack, you can keep kicking these things into the next week, but sooner or later, something's going to come back to blow up.
Well, with all of the attempts of the American forces, the Israeli forces, the absence of anybody else in continuing the fight against Iran, apparently Iran still has the cards to play here because the missiles keep firing. And the destruction, some of the videos that I've been able to see of Tel Aviv, my goodness, they're 20 years away from recovery, should the war end right now. So it's to the point where, and then the role that the Epstein files have to play in all of this. And President Trump being mentioned 5,000 times. I don't know how they came up with 5,000 as opposed to 4,999. But the fact that he's mentioned 5,000 times, half of them, the other 3 million pages, have not been revealed. Talk out there in the world scene is that several other countries have copies of these files, unredacted. They're threatening to release them. It's, it's to the point now when you see what President Trump said this last weekend, actually in just 2 sentences, using the F word against the crazy bastards in Tehran, and then finishing off with praise be to Allah. This is he non-compos mentis at this point? I don't think this is just frustration any longer. I think he's gone to the point where he's beyond what Biden was doing under the same kind of pressure. What do you think?
Well, I wonder if anyone's telling him that, if anyone's reminding him of that. And you have another problem here, which we shouldn't underestimate, which is that he's got a palace guard that is restricting his access to some of the people in his administration who are disagreeing with the policy. And this is Susie Wiles, who is the chief of staff. She's the gatekeeper, and she's keeping Tulsi Gabbard out. She's keeping some of the other people out. She kept Joe Kent out. Now, I don't know if you or your listeners know this, but Susie Wiles, during the Biden administration, after Trump left the presidency in 2020, she went to work for Benjamin Netanyahu's re-election campaign.
I did not know that.
The chief of...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the chief of staff of Trump, Susie Wiles, her firm helped re-elect Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well,
now,
that must
tells you a lot.
Well, it must be a very strong firm because he wasn't necessarily the favorite at the time.
Well,
he had
Israel is pretty much divided right now between those who want to string him up and those who see him as the savior of Israel. And it's only a question of 2 or 3 seats changing hands that would make a difference. But for a top American political firm and a top political operative to go work for Netanyahu and then come back and work for Trump at a time when Netanyahu is pressuring Trump every single day, we need more money, we need more weapons, we need more support at the UN. It gives you a sense of where some of the problem is. Now, who else is Susie Wiles allied with? Marco Rubio, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Ratcliffe, the CIA Director. These are people who are part of the what I would call the war hawk factor, at least Rubio and Ratcliffe. Bessent is a George Soros man. So here you have the president who told us he's going to be a president for peace and do all the right things, who's working with Bush neocons and a Soros swindler. So, and he's not allowed to see the people who are the MAGA supporters in his cabinet. So I think that tells you a lot about what his problem is right now.
Well, yeah, and then on top of that, this formation with Hegseth, and it seems like the formation of a Praetorian Guard that I would call it that surrounds him, that insulates him from being able to get any avenue outside of what they decide he should and should not hear. But even with that, even if he's only getting the Epstein regime picture of what's going on and what he needs to do in the position of the military he holds, a reasonable person, and the thing that comes to my mind is John F. Kennedy Jr. Not Jr., I mean John F. Kennedy. If he were in this position, he would know damn well the people that are the closest to him are the people he should suspect the most. And then that's why I think Trump has lost it, Because if he's getting the same old story day after day after day from the same group of people, and he's not adventuring out and using whatever authority he has in that Oval Office to listen to some other things, or to run everybody out of the office and sit there and start listening to some alternative podcasts of what some other viewpoints are out there. The inability to do that, and I think it is an inability, or he would have done it. He would have said something or taken some position that would show some opposition to Susie Wiles, or some opposition to Bessent, or some opposition to a whole host of Zionists who essentially have him by the throat. Because I don't see any evidence of that. I think he's just surrendered. He surrendered to this group, and he's doing exactly what they tell him to do, every bit as much as the neocons and Obama were telling Biden what to do. We've got the same situation here, and it's getting serious enough that if he actually goes through and commits these war crimes in Iran, Iran has no choice but to come back. And I mean, our bases are all closed. Our bases are all empty. The only bases that we've got now that are somewhat operational are heavily protected in Kuwait, something in Oman, a couple of things left in Bahrain. But Iran has already said, their history. You go after our desalination, their history, and we will return tit for tat. So where I used to get up in the morning, very objective, very, very optimistic, and you can't blow me down. You can't blow me over. We'll handle whatever's coming. I'm to a point now where I don't think this coming weekend is secure. So help me with this, Harley.
Well, we have a conference going on right now, the EIR Emergency Roundtable.
Yes.
Where we have a former Nobel Peace Prize winner, we have a couple of former presidents, some top officials from China and Russia, and speaking with Helga, I think there's also a couple of people from India. And what they're doing is they're kicking around what can be done to shift the reaction in the world to what the U.S. is the course the U.S. is taking with Israel. And we'll have, by the end of today, we'll have a release on it. We'll have some fact sheets, a call to action. And your listeners can go to the Executive Intelligence Review website or to the LaRouche Organization website to download these documents and start circulating them. Because what we're being told now is that there's a growing number of people in the intelligence and the defense establishment who are paying attention to what the Chinese are saying, what the Russians are saying, and what we're saying. Because as you know, Jack, we have quite a track record based on Lyndon LaRouche's work over many years.
Oh, yes.
And while there are many, many people who know what LaRouche was saying, who in polite company keep their mouths shut because they don't want to be identified as connected to LaRouche, there are a lot of them now who are starting to speak out. For example, Ray McGovern, who was in the 80s, he was one of the people from the CIA who briefed Ronald Reagan. Ray is saying, go to the EIR, LaRouche's publication. It's the best daily intelligence report you can find. Scott Ritter, who I'm sure many people in your audience are familiar with, Ritter has been saying that while he will not endorse Diane Sayre's candidacy because he said he doesn't endorse candidates, he then goes on to say that the country needs her in the White House. So it's a non-endorsement endorsement. There are people like that who are speaking out. I'm speaking to people in Europe who are former members of governments, who are advisors to political parties, who are now saying, what is LaRouche saying on this? What is LaRouche saying we should do? And we've got some things moving, for example, in Germany, where the AfD, the party that's the leading opposition now, the Alternative for Deutschland, just reversed their position on NATO. Before this, they were constantly in favor of NATO. and they were also in favor of supporting Israel in the war. They just changed it. They just broke with that policy. Now we're seeing in France, the people around Le Pen are calling us to come in to speak and address their meetings. So there is a potential sea change, but the problem is it's needed now. It's an urgent necessity. And it means that people can't allow themselves to be overwhelmed by what seems to be a destiny that we're going to end up with the human race facing nuclear obliteration. And this is a hard thing. This is really hard. How do you maintain your optimism when you see people, as you're mentioning, like your friends, who can't figure it out and throw up their arms and say, well, they either say, I don't know what to do, or you have some people, including some of my former associates, who are saying you have to trust the plan. Trump has a plan. Six-dimensional chess. One of my friends calls it six-dementia chess, is what Trump is playing.
Yeah.
So you've got to be tough with people, but also give them a sense that there is a way out. And that way out is with the developing of the commitment to sovereign nation states in the global south, and a break in the political parties in the global north. And it's hard to imagine the Democrats doing something good, or the Republicans right now. So maybe it has to be done by independents, by libertarians, by people outside the mainstream. But I think this is one of those unique moments in history where if you don't succumb to fatalism, you can change the situation in a profound and dramatic way. And this is what the American Revolution did. You know, who would have thought that the colonists could make a successful revolution against the most powerful force on the planet at the time, the British Army? But they did. And that's the kind of spirit that we have to inspire in our fellow citizens. That don't hang your head, go out and speak the truth. And that's why I would urge people to, after we get off the program today, go to the LaRouche Organization site and log on to see the rest of the emergency forum today.
I've often told people to check out the Schiller Institute and to check out the LaRouche web pages. And if they can do it, get a subscription to EIR, but at least get the daily kind of information that's being released through those organizations that I find, I think, as accurate as anything else. And I know you have been on many talk shows over in the East, Alma Mayadeen and Al Jazeera, and being interviewed by many different organizations who see some sense in what LaRouche had to say, not just in the Oasis plan, but in a community of sovereign nations who aren't sitting there trying to dominate the mineral wealth and whatever they can get out of these other countries, where they end up self-cannibalizing the entire economy and the peoples involved, but where they actually can come together and work for the greater good of everyone else, which, you know, to me is the Easter message anyway. And so when Pope Leo comes out and says, lay down your weapons, it's just, it exposes an incredible level of hypocrisy in the American public as to what's going on here, at least professed Christians. But
what you were just saying, actually, on this question of hypocrisy, you have Trump, who insisted that he's for sovereignty, and he's fighting against the World Economic Forum and the whole idea that there's a great reset where you have an open free market and no sovereignty, which is actually run under an empire, a banking empire, central banks representing the private banks. Now, what could be more emblematic of that than Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, coming out and endorsing Trump in this war? This is another example of the Epstein class pulling together, organizing itself to overwhelm the opposition. Now, the question then is, all the people who said they liked what Trump said about sovereign nation states as opposed to the blob controlled by the central banks, are they going to call the White House now? Are they going to call their congressmen? You've got some congressmen in Utah who actually can make some noise. I don't know what Mike Lee's doing, but I think Mike Lee is someone who ought to be getting a lot of phone calls from your listeners demanding that he contact Trump and tell him to cut this out. And he's one of the people who actually has a certain degree of credibility with the White House. So when I say there are things that can be done, your listeners know Mike Lee. Is he supporting the global banks and the World Economic Forum and the Biden administration policy? Or is he going to demand that Trump go back to the commitment to peace through development? And I think if we could get Mike Lee, among others, jumping up on the floor of the U.S. Senate, attacking this current policy, it would make a difference.
The other Senator Curtis, the last time I saw anything out of his office, was that he was pretty much in support of the current paradigm represented by the Oval Office. But like most of the senators, under heavy pressure from AIPAC and interested in re-election and realizing once they get into office, and the longer they're in there, I mean, they can go really, really bad, like the little old lady from South Carolina, if they're in there long enough. But
I assume you mean Lindsey Graham.
How did you know? How did you know that's who I was referring to? Just as back in when was he running? I think he was running for re-election in Trump's first term.
Actually, you know what LaRouche would say about that when you say, is he running? LaRouche would say, only his gynecologist knows for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I remember using my podium at K Talk in the morning talk show to support both he and Cruz in their re-election efforts. Holy smoke, I can't believe I just admitted that on air. Now, I can't remember the last time I voted for a Democrat, but I'll tell you, it's getting really close. It's just so disheartening. But
think of it outside of electoral politics, though, Jack, because it really, if you're thinking a lesser of two evils, maybe the Republicans have gone over the top, now go for the Democrats. It doesn't work.
No.
We've got to create a new paradigm.
Yes.
And what that means is a paradigm where the American population is fully engaged as the sovereign power in the state. In our constitutional republic, the sovereignty is in the hands of the people. And we've been accustomed to thinking that we have no say, that the media is corrupt, the politicians are corrupt, the think tanks are corrupt, the elections are fraud. Well, all of that's true. So what are we going to do? We have to take it back. And that is person by person, neighborhood by neighborhood, organization by organization. And there's never been a time where people are more put off by politicians of both parties.
I see more and more in the alternative media where more and more people are grabbing a microphone and doing that very thing, where they're developing a following that almost in every case that I've seen so far is representing the need for a serious change of direction for this country. And before, it would be pretty well balanced between Democrat, Republican, but more and more people understand now there really isn't a whole lot of difference between them. There may be a few domestic policies, but in the long run, as far as foreign policies are concerned, they're still under control of the international banking cartels. And if they want a continued presence as a successful member of the political parties in which they're members, they have to toe the line, which is why I think we haven't heard much out of Curtis. And Lee, I've always had a lot of respect for Lee. I still do. I'm just waiting to see some indication that Curtis understands what's going on. But he's just beginning in the Senate. I think he plans on being there for a while. So he's got to kind of play the game. But boy, it just seems so overwhelming at times. But still, anytime I'm talking to somebody who still seems to have a bit of an open mind, but they're not sure what direction to look for the light, I still turn them over to Schiller Institute and the LaRouche Organization for greater clarity, and suggesting that they listen to some of the Eastern alternative media reports as well. And then they don't have to go around scared to death that they feel like they have no alternative or nothing else to think, or that they have no hope. And then people who end up without hope turn to the sterling authority figure that will give them some relief in their angst. And then that's how you end up with dictators.
That's right.
Which is essentially what we got now.
Yeah. But the important thing is the game itself is changing. And the other area to keep your eye on is the economy. Now, we're not just talking about high gas prices, and that has a big impact. But that's going to start rippling through the whole commodity sector. It's going to make everything more expensive. Transportation, if you're worried about paying for your gas, imagine trading companies having to pay for fuel oil and energy to move ships and move goods once they get to the port. Think about the cost of fertilizer going through the roof. We're about to see a breakdown, which can only be prevented in the short term by a flood of money from the central banks. But that means there will be inflation, and everything you have to buy and pay for will go up in price because your value of your dollar will be dropping. So what tends to move people more than foreign policy issues is when they have a sense that they're about to lose their control over their pocketbook. You can't put food on the table, keep the roof over their head, pay the doctor, pay the education costs for the kids. That's when people start to move, and that's what I see happening now. And when Trump comes on and says, our policy is working, and then that policy is $500 billion increase for the war to help Israel. $500 billion, $1.5 trillion now for defense. And what's it good for? We can't even open up the Strait of Hormuz. So, this begins to get to the point where people are going to have to scratch their head and do some thinking. But it oftentimes, you have to get their attention, and you need the 2x4 to the head to sometimes get the attention of people who are stubborn. But I really think we're at a moment where change is possible. If we miss this moment, then we'll have no chance. And I think that's the point I'd like to leave people with today. Don't miss the moment because you don't think it'll work. Make it work. You know what they say, failure is not an option. And we can't allow the neocons and the neoliberals to control the world economy and take us into nuclear war.
I think the comments that you've made today, Harley, are every bit as prescient and gravity-born as were Lynn's comments during the interview on 9/11. He spelled out what was happening. He spelled out what was going to happen. Everything he said would happen as a result of 9/11 has happened in the early morning hours of 9/11. And now I think we've come to a point, and this is the reason why I wanted you on here this morning, is to emphasize that very point, that it's no longer waiting for somebody else to get this done. It's no longer waiting for, when I saw that there seems to be a growing open rebellion inside the armed forces who refuse to go die for Israel, that gives me a lot of hope. But still, that's looking at somebody else to save the day. There's nobody left to save the day but me and you and those who are listening to this program. Because, as you just said, if we can't do it, we may be seeing the harbinger of the end of humankind. And I can't live with that.
I appreciate what you said, Jack, in your comments on this, because I think what's important, and the way I look at my job is to do what Lyndon LaRouche used to do, which is to provide clarity for a wake-up, but also to inspire in people a sense in their own heart and mind that they can do something, that they're not helpless. Because the best thing that the enemy does is try and make us feel helpless. That we're just, they have all the money, they have all the cards, they're on top of the world, and people won't listen to you because you're a conspiracy theorist, and on and on and on. You have to have a certain sense of personal wealth. Worth, and worthiness in that you are speaking the truth, and you can reach other people to get them to do the same thing. And that's how history changes, and it can change really quickly. That's what happened in 1989 in East Germany, where all of a sudden, after years of complaining about the communist dictatorship there, people were going 10, 15 people to the Monday night demonstrations, and all of a sudden, 100 people went, and then 1,000. And then the next week, when the Stasi, the East German secret police, said we're going to have to start cracking some heads, there were 10,000 out in Leipzig. And at that point, it was clear the wall was coming down. And who was it who had predicted that the wall would come down? It was LaRouche, who understood the same process.
Well, there is a wall now in this country. And we are on one side, and the current administration is on the other. And rather than worrying about so much as to what's happening between Putin and Zelensky, or between Iran and Israel, we have a much more grave problem here. And you can do something, everybody. You can call. You can constantly call, as I've talked about on this show. You can call the offices of our congressional representation. There's 6 of them. And instead of worrying about the redistricting problems of district number 1, get on the phones and call these people and leave. You know, you may get through to a staff member. You may have to leave a message, but keep doing it, that you're not going to put up with this any longer. Any last words, Harley?
They have to hear.
Yeah, that's what they have to hear. They have to hear that there is a grow, as the example you gave in Leipzig. And then the Stasi finally had to back down, and because there was no way a handful of them were going to handle a crowd of 50,000 people.
And the dictator Honecker, a week before, said this DDR, the East German government, will last 1,000 years. 3 weeks later, he was on a plane to Chile to a hospital. He was no longer in power.
Right.
People have power if they give up their fear, and part of that fear is they don't want to be isolated. But you're not isolated. Virtually everyone around you knows something's wrong. They just don't know what to do. So become the person who knows what to do, and you'll get people to listen to you.
Harley, thanks so much for being a part of the program.
Okay, Jack. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
All right, buddy. We will talk later for sure. I appreciate you being a part of the program today. And everybody, we're going to go to national news here very quick. I'll be back tomorrow to pick up where we left off today. But as Harley is saying here, don't despair. Don't give up hope. It is now up to you. The last real, when it came down to the last people who were going to fight for George Washington, those who opposed him 4 or 5 years earlier were now joining the ranks because they could see the great possibility of overthrowing, as Harley said, the most powerful military force on the planet. Well, the time has come for us to do the same. I'm going to say goodbye.